and Planning Association. Laila holds a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and her work focuses on the intersection of planning, policy, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's passionate about growing young adults' interest in local governance and making government accessible to all residents. Laila is a good friend of mine and her family, and I was quickly reminded as we were just chatting that she is among probably 4 individuals who just get to reach up and grab my beard without like anything. She just kind of did this, and I'm like, yeah, that tracks. It feels normal. So Laila spent several years hanging out at our house. What did I say? Did I say 3?
You said.
Oh, well, I'm not trusted anywhere near this money, so he has to stay away. So Laila's a good friend. Lots to share. I'm not going to pretend to know what you're going to share. So looking forward to just engaging with you and all of us in conversation. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, as you can tell, I'm super tall. I had to decide away from this chair where I can't touch the ground to this smaller chair. But if you're all the way up there, like, and you want to come down, I would love that. I'm going to spend the first few minutes hopefully getting to know you guys a little bit more. That way I can kind of shape what I share with you guys. So like all the way up, I'm going to be like really, I'm not very tall. So there's a whole row here and I'm again, very tall and intimidating. So please be afraid to
Thank you, Olive.
So obviously you're all masters of social work students or masters or undergrads, all undergrads. And I'd love to hear, like, maybe from a couple of you, or maybe all of you, if you feel excited, like what excites you about social work, or what excites you about the human experience theories, what you look for when you hear someone speak. That'll help me inform what I share with you guys. This is so much nicer. Thank you. I love it. So does anyone want to volunteer? And I do DEI work for a living, so I will sit here silently.
They're at the part of the semester where they're very much questioning their life decisions about social work because of all the projects and decisions and practicums. And so I don't know if they're excited about or passionate about social work is the right.
That's okay. Maybe what scares you about social work? Why you chose to study this? Why you're thinking about not choosing to study this thing?
I can just say that, I mean, I don't know if it comes as a surprise to you, but I'm not a student, an undergraduate. But like I have been in the field for a long time, both in practice and now in social work higher ed for 10 years. And I get more and more excited about the field of social work and like the capacity that social workers have to just engage in such a wide arena of work, and that it always is connected to those bigger pieces where we think about how do we advance justice and how do we think about the intersections of diversity. And I love that's at the heart of what we do, but yet connected to family work and individual work and community work and change and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's like, the more I'm in it, the more I'm like, wow, what a great place to be.
What about my willing volunteer? You willfully moved down. What about you?
I started working with kids that had abusive homes when I was really little. And I had always wanted to be a teacher like my mom, but being able to be there for them and see like a little bit the light in their eyes go back anytime you like build trust. I think I want to work in like long term probably therapy, really get to know people. I think specifically because of that, because I did that for a number of years. It really helped me grow.
I think for me, I really enjoy about graduating here in May and going into master's, so there's still a lot of room. But I think I've always appreciated that social work is like an ongoing learning profession, and that doesn't stop because at the core it's all about like that connection and relationships, which is something I've always really valued. So really within like a lot of my work and my internships that I'm currently in, just being able to have those interacting pieces. I know in my life I've been like very privileged and lucky to have a lot of like support and grow up fairly well off and things like that. But not everyone has that privilege or ability. So really just being able to like connect with them, but also like see them in a way too that maybe not a lot of people see that, and provide those tools for them because they are capable individuals. They just maybe don't have the access and the resources that they need to be able to reach their full potential. And so really just kind of doing that. And I really enjoyed team experiences too, just because it does put in like a different perspective. A lot of times I admit like I get very stuck in like my way of thinking a lot and like forget that like there are other aspects of different intersecting parts that maybe affect others but don't affect me.
That's great. Well, I'll bounce around, but I will say I work in St. Hopkins. Does anyone know where Hopkins is? If you watch women's basketball, you know it's where Paige Beckers is not actually. She's from St. Louis Park. But we will claim her, and it always says she's from Hopkins. But we're a suburb in the West Metro. We're about 4 square miles, so we're very small. Hopkins High School is actually in Minnetonka. So like in all the ways, Paige Beckers has no being. Like we claim her, but she has nothing to do with us. And we have a really interesting community because we're really, we're squeezed between Minnetonka and Edina, and Golden Valley, St. Louis Park. People always think we're a really wealthy suburb. And we're not. The median income population in Hopkins is about $67,000. 65% of our residents, so it's an ever-growing number, rent their homes. But our renters stay in Hopkins for a long time. Most renters stay for about 7 years. And we have a really diverse population. So we're about 40% people of color. We have a really big Somali population. We have a really big Latinx population. And so when people hear Hopkins, a lot of times what they actually hear is Minnetonka. And Minnetonka is a very white community, a very affluent community, and we're very different. So for me, especially as a person of color, it's been a really wonderful organization to work in where I know that the residents that I serve really look like me and reflect me, and our organization has those values, very similar values to what Nick read for some of your core competencies. And so one of the programs that I run is a youth employment program really focused at students who would have some barrier to employment, whether that is interactions with the criminal justice system, being a parent, having an IEP, or being on free and reduced lunch. But one of the things that we do with them is really trying to showcase them the variety of careers that can be available to them. And every year when we do this, and we visit, people who work at all levels of government and do all types of jobs. And so often people say, oh, I started in social work. And so we've had a lot of students who leave our program and say, like, I think I might be really interested in social work because we've had people who are, economic development directors, people who work very high up in the county, people who are police officers who their first entry into whatever piece of career field was social work. And so if you're at the point in the semester where you're like, what was I thinking? There is a lot of ways to do social work and to care for your community that is not being a social worker. So, and it is always so fun to show our students, right, that you can go and get your education and then that turns into lots of things. I always tell the anecdote that when I was in my master's program, speakers would come and be like, your career path's not going to be linear. Like it's not going to be just like straight up the like food chain. And I was like, for other people, but for me, it's going to be linear. It wasn't. And immediately, like 3 jobs in after grad school, I'm doing something completely different. And so, if again, you're at the point where you're like a couple weeks out from either graduating or being done and not thinking about this for the summer, that's okay too. You will figure it out. And whatever you do will feed into the next thing that you do. So yes, Nick was like, they know things about you, but you can share about our relationship. But then every story he told me was embarrassing for me. He was like, yeah, I don't know if you remember, you backed my car into a pole, and I was like, that's embarrassing for me. But it is true. Nick did questionably teach me to drive. I think that I was actually Nick's first child. I'm not sure that he intended to have a kid at like 21, but here we were. So I grew up in the church that Nick and Brenna were in right after they graduated from college, how old were you?
I was young.
Yeah, unlike now for both of us.
Why?
What?
Why now?
Oh, okay, perfect. And we, I don't know, how many of you have like a very big religious background? Like this is a religious institution, right? Are you all like super religious? Am I gonna ruin your lives today? Like, did a lot of you grow up going to church? Yeah, everyone grew up going to church. Like a lot of church or a little bit of church? Raise your hand, like a lot of church. Okay, about more than half, like a little bit of church. Okay, so I grew up going to a lot of church. Okay, let's see. So my dad is from Morocco and my mom is from Greater Minnesota. And they met and had me out of order operations, then got married. And my dad had immigrated to the country about 3 years prior to meeting my mom and having me. And it was just not a good relationship for a lot of reasons. And so since I was 2, my parents have been separated. And it was just like a really challenging situation, which I never fully understood, like as a kid, this relationship, both like between them, right, as like 2 parents navigating like shared custody of a kid. And then as like, just like living with my mom who is on the autism spectrum and she has had a lot of trauma in her life. And I think like now through lots of therapy, if you're gonna do therapy, enroll in therapy, if you're gonna work with people, be in therapy. If you exist on this planet in 2025, probably just be in therapy. But I think I never really understood that dynamic. And so I grew up in a very abusive household, both like verbally and physically abusive for the first like good portion of my childhood. And I think so much of that was just my mom she had me at 21. She was like literally a child. I cannot imagine. I'm 33 and I would still be a teen mom. And so I cannot imagine doing what she did, right? At the age she did it and by herself and with, what I think are probably the emotional skills of a 9 or 10-year-old. And I think that still is probably about where my mom is. She had a very, very traumatic upbringing, and I think that really stunted her emotional capacity to parent. And so I think that really led her to try to seek community wherever she could find it. And so whether that was from people that she met through other friends of friends. But I think she grew up in a pretty religious home. And so I think her thought was always like, I'm going to find that community in church. And so a lot of my early years, probably like 5, 6, 7, I remember trying a lot of churches and really trying to figure out like which of them would be the right fit for our family. And I think we ended up at a pretty small church that had that net. And I don't know, a lot of you who grew up in the church probably know that feeling of caretaking for one another, right? Or caretaking for someone in your church. And I think that was like a blessing and a curse, right, for me now as an adult, which was that net of people who had other children about my age and were really felt called to care for people in the church as they would other members of their family, really helped my mom be a better person. And so about the time that we started going to church like very regularly was a lot of behaviors in our home improved a lot. But I think that like was substituted with like so much church. Like I think we were probably at church like 3, 4 times a week, like so much. So when you say a lot of church, you probably actually don't mean a lot of church in the way that I mean it. And we grew up Assemblies of God, which is like, I think on the cultier end of evangelical Christianity. And I, again, Nick, am I gonna get you in trouble?
You might, but that's okay.
Okay. And so I think I'm the cultier end of evangelical Christianity. And
What did
so,
you say you broke what on the website?
Assemblies of God.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you considered other Bible colleges in the Twin Cities, maybe you looked at North Central University, that is Assemblies of God. And I would say there was, I think, a lot of care in that experience and also a lot of judgment in a lot of ways, right? Because I think probably almost my entirety in that church, I was the only person of color. And I think it was a very, very conservative experience, right? And so, which I can share more about in detail. And please stop me. If you have questions at any point in this journey that I'm going to tell you, please stop me. But it was a very conservative experience in which I learned very quickly. There was, even in this place that I think does, and I can talk about both, right? And I think that's an important thing, we can hold both things. In a place that provided a lot of care and compassion and help, was also a place of a lot of judgment and hierarchy. And so I think I learned quickly, and at an age where I was very impressionable to these things, right? 6, 7, 8, that my mom was sort of less than everyone, right? As a single mother in our church, that as someone who didn't have a father figure around, right? That there was sort of this, I think undercurrent of judgment on our family and of things that I did, right? And we had a pastor and his wife who were also I don't know, they were also just very, she ground her own wheat for flour and made bread kind of vibes. And so I, one of my most traumatic memories, which is so dumb, but you remember the things you remember as a kid, was going to a Minnesota Vikings game, and I had gotten money to buy whatever I wanted, and I wanted cotton candy, so I ordered cotton candy, and she was aghast. I have never been so judged for food in my entire life than at this age of 9 years old ordering cotton candy. And I think that there was a ton of experiences that I had like that, right? Where it was, whether it was the things I was allowed to do or the things that were different in our family compared to other families in our church. And I also grew up in a really interesting dynamic, which there weren't a ton of children in this church. I was one of 8 children who regularly attended this church, and the other 7 were boys. And so that is also a really interesting kind of element to this entire thing, because I think it really reinforced for me gender norms of what I was allowed to do and not do, right? As a girl who grew up with 7 boys, and all 7 of them belongs to 2 of the pastors at our church, right? And so this is now reflectively as a grown adult, it's just a really weird dynamic to have grown up in, and from the way that I was allowed to dress, right? To I think a lot of the choices that I made as an adult really came from growing up in this environment. And I, I think that I also poor Nick knows this. I dated one of those 7 boys, right? And he was just incredibly controlling and very verbally abusive. He would pick me up from school every day, and I would come out and he would tell me if I could wear what I could wear, and then I would go back inside and change. And so I think that again really enforced a lot of the ways in which I viewed and instilled the way the world worked. And in a way that was never questioned when I came home, right? I think there's a lot of people who end up in these, in churches and in family structures like mine, where maybe as a single mom, the mom is maybe more independent, or talks a counter narrative to that, and that really wasn't the case in my house. And so I think I accepted so much of that as fact, and I spoiler alert, I'm a lesbian. So it didn't occur to me though until 2 years ago. So I think that that is some of these, like the way in which and structure in which I grew up really, really reinforced. Are you giving me attention?
No, I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you said toxic counter narrative in the home. Could you
Yeah.
say that again, or what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think like in, I love memoirs and I read a lot of memoirs, especially people who have like religious trauma. And I think there are lots of ways to be religious and have spirituality that is not traumatic. At a wedding recently, Nick's wife was like, I think I need to go around and apologize to everyone for the religious trauma that I gave you. And I was like, I will accept. But I think that there's a lot of ways that that can exist in the church, in the way that it existed in the church that I grew up in, because it was so judgmental and so regulating of the things like we like. And I grew up with people who were like in even more conservative Assemblies of God churches, where like I went to a wedding where like we couldn't, the wedding was at noon because you couldn't dance, and so you might as well have it at noon because like then you can even do something else with your day. But I think the ways in which I was told to be and show up and exist were reinforced at home rather than countered, right? Rather than saying like, no, it's okay to do these things, because I think that my mom was just so bought in, because I think she saw the environment that I grew up in my really youngest years, where she had such a challenge, parenting at a level that was acceptable, and that she had kind of like the church had changed that for her. And I think in a lot of ways really did, right? Really improved and impacted the way that she showed up as a parent. But I think that it meant like buying like so all in, right? And that anything that we were told in the church was true, right? And was the way that it should be. And so like I didn't watch a rated R movie until like well into college, right? Like I was not allowed to do 90% of like things normal kids do, like school dances or like staying. I don't think I stayed out past 10 more than like 3 nights in high school. I grew up in a very, very, very strict household. And so that was really formulated around, I think, my religious experience. And so, so I think that that informs a lot of the way that I view the choices that I made kind of past that point. And so, but I didn't really, because I didn't receive that sort of like counter feedback, and I really never received it anywhere. And when I went to school as a middle schooler or high schooler, I wasn't like, I joke that I went to Bible college for like a year and a half. And I always joke that I learned like I just didn't like Jesus enough to be there. Like maybe I liked him a little bit, but I surely didn't like him enough to pay as much as I was paying to be in Bible college. And I think I always sort of felt that way. And so I wasn't ever like a person who like I was bought into it, right? Like Nick will know I was a fucking nightmare as a teen. But I think I wasn't someone who was like went to school and was, even like proselytizing to my other colleagues. I wasn't like only hanging out with religious kids. Like I did a lot of like shenanigans as a teenager, and really distanced myself from that when I would go to school. But not, I think, in ways, like still in ways that I was not necessarily curious about those other experiences. This is so good for you guys to like have these conversations now, because I didn't, I still learned really not to question the ways in which like the things I was being taught, right? And so I wanted to have other experiences. I wanted to have other friends outside of my church. I wanted to, I played sports, I did other things, but it never was encouraged for me to be like curious or learn or see what existed, right? And so like I think this is a like, a long-standing thing that I have to push myself out of, is to like question why people did things, or what other people's family structures look like, or what that looked like. I think I was always so in a place of being like just grateful to have time, because I'm telling you, like even till the day I graduated high school, like 3 to 4 times a day, like times a week at church. For a while, like my daycare was at church. And I think that at a certain point, I like stayed at Nick and Brenna's like almost every day after school. And so You know, I think that even when I had those out of, you know, in school experiences where I was able to broaden my world a little bit, it existed in such a small bubble, right? I think probably starting in like 7th or 8th grade, like I literally rode the bus to Nick and Brenna's and stayed there until my mom got off of work or got out of whatever she was doing for a good portion of middle and high school. And so even after hours, I had a very limited access to freedom. And so you know, I went from high school into being like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like Nick and Brenna went to this Bible college, like I guess I'm gonna do that too. And Brenna, who Nick's wife, was like the coolest person I knew. And so I was like, I'll just do exactly what she did. And I think that this is an area that I will of like when you see and interact with whether it's students or people that you're working with, right? I don't think anyone ever knew to identify that I needed guidance, right? I think I literally filled out one singular college application. I just decided like I would be a youth pastor. Like Brenna did it. I love her. She seems great. And this is like all the while I don't like this. Like I have never had like an amazing time at church, but like I had no idea. And I, you know, was in talented and gifted classes all throughout high school, AP classes. And I think because the assumption from guidance counselors and teachers was that other students who were in these classes were going home and receiving help, right? Receiving guidance from their parents. You know, they're doing college visits, they're doing all these things that like, I didn't need help either, right? Because they're spending their time on these, on kids who like might not go to college, might not even graduate. And so I think I just sort of skated through being like a pretty smart kid who just had no barometer for what the real world looked like. And when I went to college and moved into the dorms and kind of got that freedom of, I worked at a job outside of campus and I started to like widen my friend circle and to be like, huh, I think I might have lived in a really small bubble this entire time. And there's still like, I think there's still so much that like cultural moments of like, I didn't listen to secular music, right? Like there are still cultural references I never did. One of my favorite jokes is that a girl on my floor at North Central was good friends with the Jonas Brothers growing up. And there are 4 Jonas Brothers, so I just assumed there were 4 in the band. And I'd be like, there's always one missing. Like, why is one Jonas Brother always missing? And that's because he is not in the band. And so like that is the level of like cultural competency with like a world outside of Christianity that I entered as like an 18-year-old going into college with. It's like having not a clue. And so I think for a very long time, probably from 18 until like 26, I spent figuring out who the heck I was and what I wanted to do. And that is a really long time to not know like who you are or what you are. And then, you know, being able to feel like the course corrected. Okay, I'm doing okay now. Don't worry, guys. But, you know, I think I spent almost a decade sort of like rebounding from that, right? I went to North Central for 3 semesters, was like, I got in trouble for skipping chapel too much. And I was like, this might be the sign, guys, that I am not built for this. I don't want to go to chapel, to go every day. You guys have to go to chapel every day here? Yeah, you have to go every single day. And it was like an hour and a half. I don't want to do that. Like I can barely sit and talk to you guys and I'm the one talking for an hour and a half. And so I was like, this is my nightmare. And I just never, I think sometimes like some of the things that like, where I'm like, wow, my life could have turned out really differently was just like the gut check of being like, something doesn't fit. Like something's not right. And I have to figure out what that is. And I have to figure that out even if it disappoints people. And so I think I did that a lot to my, to people who know me from the time of, you know, being a kid in this church to now is just being like, this doesn't fit. And so, you know, I think there's a reality in which I married that pastor's son, right? Like, I think that We broke up, he moved to Alabama, and 6 months later, he was engaged to some girl he met at a Starbucks. Like, Godspeed to her, they have a bunch of kids. Like, I really dodged a bullet there. And I think that there's like, I love kids, but like, I don't want to live in Alabama. And I think like there is a world in which I would have like suffered through New Central and like gone all the way through 4 years and been like, oh no, I've made a terrible mistake. So like, please trust your gut. If you are feeling this is not the right move for you, don't tell Nick that I told you this and convinced you to not be a social worker. But I think I really trusted, despite I think a lot of conditioning of that environment, that I really trusted my gut. And I think this layers, right, on top of like growing up in a really conservative space, in a very conservative church, in a very, very white space, and in a space where I think retrospectively, this is probably a big part of the trauma that I have, is that in a space that was just filled with microaggressions, right? Filled with people who had no idea what to do, right? Like as a child who didn't look like people around them, didn't have like the same like family like mechanisms, right? But that, I think I'm really fortunate that like I even made it into a talented and gifted program. Talented and gifted programs a lot of times are ways in which we separate white kids from all other kids of color and give them a better education. And so I was really, really fortunate in some areas, but I think that a big part of that, and in that period, like 18 to 26 of being like, who the fuck am I? Was figuring that out and being like, for the first time, because I grew up in an environment that really minimized my own difference from the people adjacent to me, I minimized that for myself, and I had no community that looked like me or had shared experiences to me. And I felt very alien for a long time because I didn't know any different, right? Like I didn't know, again, you grow up in this environment that really says like the guy at the front of the church knows everything and then you don't question anything else. And so in that period of time, I was both being like, Bible college is not it. I have no idea what I want to be. I'm going to go to community college. I ended up going to the University of Minnesota, and I had some amazing professors there, and especially like amazing professors of color who were able to validate that experience for me, right? And were able to say, that the experience that I had, even though it didn't look the same as other students of color in my classes, was the same, right? Was a really similar and challenging experience that I had no context for because no one had ever talked with me about it, right? I grew up with people calling me mulatto, right? Like that is so fucking racist. That's crazy. And like people commenting endlessly on like how beautiful my skin is, how gorgeous my hair is. And like I had no context because again, like check on your friends who are kids of color with white moms, check in on them. They're not well. And like I had no context for any of those things, right? And I had no idea until, 2 decades later that I had experienced 2 decades of like people around me, even people in my family, being incredibly racist to me. And so I think now I'm in a period of being like, oh, I actually do not have to come back for Christmas. Thank you so much. But I think that I didn't experience that until I was able to be in a place where I could like expand my world. And I was so lucky that I got to do that, right? I think there is very much a world in which I would have just been like, kept going down the journey, kept going down the path in this way. And I think I've always been a really curious person. Like Nick's wife, Brenna, would always say, like, if there's someone I know that's going to get a PhD, it's going to be Laila, right? Like, and I think I always had people like who I think made these comments that really formed me in ways that I don't think I ever really accounted for until now I'm in this place of being able to reflect back. But like that comment, right? And Nick and Brenna always like being like a place of shelter for me, and I think a pretty rough stage of life. But then also like I remember I was on a field trip once for school, and a parent of another kid was like, Layla's gonna be like a businesswoman. Like she has it. Like she has like that like take charge, like amazing mentality. And I had only ever been called like loud, disruptive, chaotic, right? I had never had someone say that those traits about me were like positive, right? That they would have a positive outcome in my life, that I would be someone who would use those things to be in a position of authority, right? To believe in myself. And I think about that all of the time. And so I think it took so long for me to get to a place where I got to finally have these experiences where I was like, holy shit, like I have been like living under a rock, like literally a rock. And so I finished my degree. I have an American Studies undergrad at the University of Minnesota, which I loved. It's a degree that really is about kind of comparing, political events and how the media responds to that and how the movies you watch are informed by the political environment that we're experiencing now, or the books that you read, or all those things. And I love that because I didn't really know that much about it, right? I was watching and learning about so many of these things in real time. And I think that's still the case, right? Like learning about voter suppression and learning about like all of the ways that the US government has been historically really bad to other countries, to marginalized communities. And for the first time, I was learning all of that. And I think it really lit the direction of like where I went in the rest of my life, which was I knew I really wanted to help people. And I didn't really know what that looked like. And I kind of had an affinity for policy. I really liked public policy. I really liked government. And so I was like, well, I don't know. I don't really like, what do? I have this kind of useless degree, like an American Studies degree, a bachelor's degree. It's not going to get you a lot of jobs. And so I was like, maybe I'll go to public policy school. And so I served a term of service in AmeriCorps. I really recommend that. If you're like, what the heck am I going to do after this? AmeriCorps is such an amazing opportunity, and I got to like further expand my world. And I did that at like 26. And so like most people are like either like fresh out of high school or like fresh out of college, and I was much older than everyone else, but it was still such an incredible opportunity. And then I went and did my master's degree, and I've been working in as either a consultant or working at a city for the last, I don't know, 6, 7 years. And now I work for a local government in our administration office. And I think it has, all of those things have really shaped me. And then, I realized much too late to the full laughing of my girlfriend in the stories that I tell her, where she's like, how did you not know that you were gay? And I was like, I didn't, I'm telling you, I had no idea. And because so many of I had so many of these experiences that I never questioned, or I never had anyone to talk to about, or I just grew up in such a like heteronormative patriarchal existence that I just fully over my head. And so, I think, I don't know what the lesson of this is, but.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So, maybe 3 months ago, 4 months ago, you changed your name.
Sure did.
Sure did.
Yeah.
Mind just giving us a quick,
Yeah.
you wrote really beautifully about this, and I think like name, I mean, it's your name now, it's not like my preferred name, this is my name.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding or
Yeah.
thinking about this correctly, but if you could talk a little bit about name and the significance of what it is to make a read.
We just don't have enough time for all the trauma I've endured as a child. So my mom met my dad and my mom separated to divorced at 10 because my dad needed to become a citizen of the United States. And I had a pretty on and off again relationship with my dad. He is just like, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, he's probably doing his best. He was also like a kid. But he, I think that he came to the US and probably didn't plan for that to happen to him, to have a kid. I think he had a very different version of like establishing himself in the US, marrying a Moroccan woman, like bringing her here, starting a family. And that's not what happened. And so when I was about 13, Laila is my middle name. So I have my birth name is Piggy Sue, which was my grandmother's on my mom's side, those names put together. And And my dad, had remarried, has a family. We're not really in contact. But about the same time that I was graduating from my undergrad program, I got a Facebook message from someone being like, hey, who are you? And I was like, who are you? And they were like, well, we think we might be related to you. And I was like, great. And the worst case scenario is like my dad has like a bunch of more children, but it's my cousin. And they had my uncle, who is now passed. He was a 78-year-old French man Googling himself. And when he Googled himself, he found my Facebook profile. And I look identical to my cousins. Like all of us look like carbon copies. And so he was like, that belongs to us. And so he convinced my cousin to message me and be like, where are you? And in Morocco, your last name is only the last name of your family. No one else has your last name if they're not related to you. So it's not like Johnson or Anderson. If you have my last name, we belong to each other. And so I learned at like 26, 27, that my dad had never told his family. He had just like been like, you know what, they're probably never gonna meet this kid. Like, I'm just not gonna tell them. Which was probably fine thinking in like 1991, but less fine thinking in 2015. And so I've had like a really amazing opportunity to connect with that family and be connected to them. I'm actually leaving tomorrow to go to my cousin who initially messaged me. She's getting married, so I'm flying to France to go to her wedding. But while I was there, they have always called me. That's just always been like the way that we've operated. And even kind of prior to that, I have never liked the name Peggy Sue. I know you're shocked by that. It's a beautiful name, right? But I think the biggest challenge, right, in one, just being named for these two women who also hilariously, like Peggy Sue is a combination of two women who didn't like their names. Like one of my grandmother's names was Margaret and the other was Froni. She was a Dutch immigrant. And so they were Peggy and Susie. And then I inherited their like Frankenstein name from these two women who didn't like their name either. And so my earliest memories, I can remember like scheming to try to like convince someone to like call me Maggie or like how I could get out of this name. And so, I brought this up, probably a handful of times throughout my life of being like, wow, it would be so inconvenient. Like, it would just be like everyone's going to have to learn to call me this. And it's going to be like really inconvenient. And I think, especially before we saw such an influence of trans people really like fighting the fight of like having preferred pronouns and having preferred names and like doing so much work has allowed, I think, this to be a much easier path for me as a person who just like didn't like their name. And so I just was like, well, I guess I'm gonna finally do it. I'm gonna I think coming out and having to like, you have to come out to everyone, and I had to like come out and also get divorced at the same time and be like, you guys have made several terrible life decisions and that I have to now tell people. And so I think I was like already in a place of being like, I'm already telling people like so much personal information. I might as well tell everyone I also don't like this name. And it's been amazing. Like people who I thought, like I was complaining a little bit jokingly about my city manager who's like has the most boomer energy of all time, has never messed it up. I'm not one time, right? And so he was like, well, I just like it. And I was like, I'm so glad it pleases you, Mike. But I think that I had that experience of just being like, it didn't align with who I was like internally, but I also didn't align with who I was externally. And I had that experience every day of my life, right? Whether that was, people who were expecting an older white woman, right, when they met me in person, or my friends having to explain to their friends that their friend Peggy Sue was indeed like another, 20 something. I had to go to court for something work related and they had never Googled me, the litigating attorney. And so when I walked in, it was a discrimination case and they were like set to be like this white woman, she discriminated. And then I like walked into the attorney's office and she was floored. She had never looked through the research paperwork that her paralegal had given. And so she didn't expect me to be a woman of color, right? And so like, she spent the whole day being like, like my whole argument was predicated on the fact that you were probably racist. And so I think that experience over and over again and having to explain why I look like this, but have that name is an exhausting experience to have over and over again. And so, I think that's a challenge that a lot of families of color make, right? Do I give my kid like a really culturally appropriate name, or do I give them something that will make their name look better on the resume? And then what does that mean when they experience the world with either of those versions of a name, right? How does that impact how other people will judge and experience them in the world? And my experience of being a Peggy Sue in the world was really negative a lot of the time. And I think I never really associated with it. And I think I always came back, even as long as I remember having wanted to do that, then when you get to experience getting to do that, right, with my other side of my family and feeling the validation of that, it's really comforting. And so I think it was the right time for me to do that. I had already kind of upended my life. And so it was easy to just keep flipping the tables. But it was the right choice for me. And I think that I've always, again, like sort of had that gut check of being like, I think something here doesn't feel right or feel authentic to who I am. And so, I know, thank you for bringing that up. So I want to leave time for questions, and I feel like I've talked a lot and probably I've given you a bit of a shock, I'm not sure. So,
Questions for Laila?
yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about what you do with the city exactly?
Yeah, so I work in our city manager's office. The city manager is kind of the CEO of a city. So all cities have some form of like a council who are your elected officials, and then a city manager or a city administrator who run it. And the city that I work for, or a city manager style form of government, has one person that our council can hire and fire, and then everyone else reports to our city manager. So I like it. I think it's a little bit more secure form of government and an administrative form of government. Literally everyone works at the discretion of the council. And so I was a city planner. So like literally you got to build something. I'm the person that tells you whether or not you can build it based on the rules in our book. But I did that for a really long time and I really liked it. And when I moved to Hopkins about 4 years ago, in this role, it was a hybrid role between planning, so doing a little bit of that planning work, like literally like looking at code, logistics of like developers, right? Our diversity, equity, inclusion work, which had never really had a home in our organization. It had always kind of been like, we have time for this, we'll do it. And then sustainability work was initially part of my role, and then now I oversee youth programming and youth workforce development. And so we call it special projects and initiative manager because like anything's a special project if you try hard enough. I actively sold a house this week, right? We're in the process of doing our annual strategic planning for equity, right? So having what our equity initiatives are going to be for the year and how we're going to work through that. So I was telling Nick, tonight I'm going to do a proclamation for Page Beckers. I do a lot of different stuff, most of it being like HR, human resources, and diversity, equity, and inclusion work, because we're really focused as an organization on hiring, recruiting, finding, and retaining diverse workers to join our workforce. And so it's more reflective of the community that we serve. And having staff who are culturally competent and culturally responsive to the community that we serve. So I do a lot of training, I do a lot of education, I do a lot of planning work around different type of planning, not like city planning, but like planning work around how as an organization, we are a more equitable and inclusive organization. Yeah.
Within like kind of the 8-year span where you talked about like finding yourself and kind of like a lot of like cognitive dissonance and like this is new and everything. I don't know if this question makes sense, but like, how did you almost like pace yourself or like make yourself here in the midst of like all that change and reestablishing?
Well, that's such a good question. Could you go back to my like 22 to 28-year-old self and teach her to do that? I think, oh my gosh, what a good question. I probably didn't, right? I think I'm much better at that now as like a 33-year-old rather than like that 8-year span of like, I think I had a moment where I realized, like I'd gone to North Central, then I transferred to a community college, and I was kind of like, well, maybe I'm done here. Like maybe this is like, I had an associate's degree, I was like, maybe this is it. Like I had a full-time job that like paid pretty well. And I think I just had this moment of being like, if I don't do something right now, like I'm gonna lose all the momentum, right? Like I was like maybe a year out of finishing my associates, and I was like, if I don't do something right now, I'm watching all of my friends graduate from and get these jobs, and I'm always just going to be this like person who has like an associate's degree. And I don't know, I think there's probably like more of like the achiever in me, of being like I didn't want to fall behind, right? Of like what that means. And now like I probably have a different, more nuanced take on what that looks like. But in that moment of just being like, I'm gonna fall behind, and I'm gonna fall behind everyone if I don't start doing things. So literally for a good portion of like probably 4 of those 8 years, I was like working full time, going to school full time, and then like spending any moment I could with my friends, probably doing things that I shouldn't say in front of me, right? And so, but I had built a really, really strong community, and I think that community supported me so much. I think that was probably the first, like the foundation of finding like my queer identity. And I had been out as bi probably at some point in those 8 years. But I think I had a lot of people who really believed in and supported me and like cheered me on, even as I like kind of figured all of that out. And so self-care then was like sort of non-existent. I think I was really like, have to like achieve this thing. I have to get through this. And then I think by that point, then I was like, well, I did all of that, but now I still can't probably find a job. So I need to go get a master's degree. And I think I was really like in the hamster wheel of being like a vacuum for like everything I had never experienced before, right? Like all these new relationships and like honestly like going to bars and going dancing and like hanging out with my friends and like doing all these things that I had never gotten to experience and experience this world that's so much bigger than what I grew up in. And so I think I just sort of like vacuumed that up, and in ways probably that like then I didn't even like process that, right? And like take the time to slow down. So now I'm like much more of like a self-care queen. I'm really like with my 3 staff that work for me, and I really like push that for them of being like, take the time that's like what works for you, right? Like I'm a very extroverted person. Self-care for me often looks like spending time with people who I care about a lot and like and being, out of the home. But I also have, hobbies and activities that I spend time doing. So I think that that's a thing that also probably wasn't as much in the dialogue, 10 years ago of being like, maybe take care of yourself a little bit. And so I really encourage you, especially as you enter into these professions that demand so much of you. And I experience it in only fragments because I think I've gotten to a place where I'm not doing a lot of like direct service. I have 2 connector positions that do direct service. I have one person who spends like 10 hours a week just helping people with like immigration paperwork, getting passports, doing the paperwork that if they get deported, their child has someone who is like a legal citizen, right? And so for her, I'm always like, okay, what are we gonna do? Like how are you gonna, when you leave this place, like how are you gonna decompress and like process all the things that you were doing? Because this is a really scary environment to do this work. But I think that finding those things that really work for you, and that's probably not gonna look like the person sitting next to you or your friends, that make you feel like you can go back into your space, like ready to do this work again, is so huge. And also knowing that could change, right? Like something that worked one day, whether it's like getting out and getting that fresh air, might not work the next day. And trying to figure out how to find that balance. And I think really pushing that word like balance. I think you're all about to enter professions that demand a lot from you, right? Where like you might realize like at the end of a week you work 60 hours, right? And that is just like, that is what was demanded of you because of the profession that you choose. But figuring out how to have those conversations with the people who supervise you or like at your place of employment, like that's not a sustainable way of existing. And you're going to burn yourself out, and you're only at the beginning of what will hopefully be like a really impactful career. And so I like to have that conversation with my staff of being like, how much do we have on our plates and do we feel good? And if you can't come to work and have like a conversation with your coworkers to just like shoot shit and like catch up, you're too busy, right? Like you should have an hour or two a week where you're allowed to just like gossip, right? And so like if you don't have the space in your life for that, like you need to have that work balance too. It can't be, you cannot take care of yourself exclusively in your personal time. It's just like not feasible. You need to be able to take some of that 40 or 50 or however many hours you end up working in, especially if you're doing direct service work, to like breathe during that time. So
Just do it during Edie's class and not mine. So.
Mm.
Take this off there. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we do have class coming up. So well, some people have class coming up. So
Yeah.
we're gonna call it there. So thank you, Laila. I appreciate it. Yeah, you said something early on that I'm like, that I wish we all could come to places of wisdom earlier in our lives, like me, you, for you all, and these are just such great opportunities. You said earlier, like holding like a duality when you were talking about like the church served a lot of real positive things for your mom, for you. Church also like was the source of a lot of pain and hurt and trauma for you, and maybe not for your mom, right? But like this idea of like both are true, and I think one of the things like that is hardest to learn is this duality of like church isn't good or bad, like church, like any relationship we are in, like is complicated. And I wish I had like all sorts of that sort of wisdom early on in my life. Because so often I think I'm trying to pursue like the right thing. And there are places where like, oh, it's supposed to be. And so then my life becomes oriented trying to measure up to the standards of a supposed to be.
I think we also exist in a world that really pushes us towards a binary, right? I think especially like a very highly politically charged environment pushes us to like be like, I can only hold one side of something, right? Like I can only be all the way this way. And so much isn't that, right? Like so much isn't, I can only be the right way, right? Like you like will probably receive a wonderful like education from this like religious organization. And also like there's a lot of harm that the evangelical church has done, right? Like you will have to grapple with that for the rest of your lives as Bethel graduates, right? As people going into this field, like that is just an undeniable fact of the way that like evangelical church Christianity has transformed America. That is a piece that as someone, when you introduce yourself and say that you went to a Christian university, that especially your clients who have been harmed, but in that way, that you will have to be able to hold and be able to articulate and be able to.
Yeah. A word holds multiple experiences for somebody you're speaking to. So for some, you'll be walking across your graduation stage and you'll be crying tears of like, what great memories, and I'm so sad to say goodbye. And because I've heard some of the speeches and talked to some of the graduates, and others will walk across and have tears for very different reasons. And yeah, like lots of things to hold there. Thank you. Thank you for taking that. All right. If you have class with me, we'll start like at 2:30, okay? So go walk around, grab something to eat or something, but I'll see you all at 2:30. If somebody wouldn't mind just popping in for the students who aren't here, but maybe are like, where is it?